Okay, I'd like to call the Pelham Board of Education meeting of December 16th, 2020 to order. Would everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. So this brings us to item 2.4, which is a motion to authorize personnel designations for Pauline Davies, our new district clerk, for the remainder of the school year. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks, Sue. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Leah. So I was hoping that we could officially welcome Pauline to our meeting in person, but we're very happy to have you and welcome. So any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, perfect. Sue, 2.5, reiteration of executive session motions.
Sure. The board met in executive session to discuss collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of Civil Service Law and the employment history of a particular person.
Perfect. Thank you. So welcome to the last school board meeting of 2020. That felt really good to write when I jotted down a few notes. While the start of 2021 only brings us closer to the middle of our school year, for me at least, it symbolically marks the end of a calendar year that I think we're likely never going to forget, and one that many of us will look forward to putting well behind us in the past. Since we met last, we've seen an increase in COVID cases, which have impacted our schools with shifts to remote learning for some classes and even for entire school buildings. As district communications have indicated, because we follow Department of Health requirements for 14-day quarantines and for who must quarantine upon contact, just one case can significantly impact whether we have enough staff to keep our schools open for in-person instruction. As a parent, I know that the unexpected nature and sometimes frequency of these scheduling changes can be frustrating and unsettling. I thank all of our parents, our students, and our staff and teachers for all of your flexibility and understanding. I'm also very thankful for our building administrators who continue to work tirelessly to ensure the health and safety for our students and our staff. So last week, I had the chance to attend the virtual town hall with the board members from around the region. And these town halls began in April when the pandemic first closed our schools, and they've served as a great resource for board members to compare notes and gain perspective on how other districts are managing the challenges that COVID has presented our schools. This month's meeting focused on plans for COVID testing, hybrid learning, and attendance, and the impact of quarantines on their district's abilities to staff their schools. As I'm sure Ms. Chung will touch on tonight, districts are busy preparing for COVID testing to ensure that their school buildings can stay open if their community is declared a microcluster zone. Like Pelham, school districts are also reflecting on their hybrid learning plans so they can consider adjustments that may be needed in the second half of the year. One common theme that emerged was that despite the fact that our schools are facing difficulty keeping their buildings fully staffed, parents and elementary parents in particular are voicing desires for more in-person instruction. Many schools at the secondary level are seeing students shift to remote learning, perhaps for concerns about the impact that quarantine may have on holiday plans. I think it's important to share these updates so that the public knows that we are not making decisions for Pelham in a vacuum. Dr. Champ also networks with the superintendents around the region, just like I was able to do through a meeting like this. It's also important to remember that schools around our region, our state, and our country are facing many of the same challenges that we are. While there are no easy answers, the chance to problem solve with the help from others is something I'm especially grateful for this year. I expect these challenges will continue into the beginning of our new year. However, I'm feeling hopeful for a healthier and hopefully more normal feeling in 2021. On behalf of the board, I wish our Pelham school family a healthy and a happy holiday season. So that brings us to the approval of the minutes, section 3. Do I have a motion? I'd like to take a consent for 3.1 and 3.2. Do I have a motion? Thanks, John. Do I have a second? Thanks, Eileen. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Section 4 is administrative and committee reports. 4.1 is superintendent's report. Dr. Champ. You're on mute. You're still on mute, Dr. Champ. Sorry.
Here we go. Okay. You know, it's all good until we're in public, and then all the technology skills fall apart. Thanks so much, Jessica. I appreciate everything that you shared is just so on point. And I too want to take a moment just to thank our incredible staff who have continued day in, day out to remain committed to serving the students of our schools. It certainly has gotten more and more challenging as cases have risen, as folks are experiencing closures around us in other districts, which has ramifications for their own children, their own family situations. And they've continued really just to commit and to do everything they can to be here. So I need to really thank them. Our custodians who, as we were talking earlier today, they just Johnny on the spot anytime we need rooms sanitized, we need things cleaned. Our nurses are true Wonder Women who have just held everything together for everybody. They're holding our kids together, our teachers together, our parents together, and Julia holds them together. So we all work together. We just can't thank them enough for the tremendous weight that they're bearing, and that they're doing it with professionalism and with true sacrifice and commitment. So I just wanted to start off with that tonight. I think probably the biggest topic on anybody's mind tonight is the snow. Let's be real. And yes, I'm getting flooded with emails to make it a snow day and not a remote learning day. So I have not made the decision yet. But please know we are monitoring. Just for anyone who is watching who may not be aware, New York State is allowing a pilot this year. Because everyone has remote learning plans, they are allowing districts, if the situation allows, to shift to remote learning instead of having to use a snow day. So we are monitoring whether that will be an opportunity or not. Certainly, if there are power outages and internet outages, then remote learning is not going to be possible. And we don't want situations where we've got some on, some off, and create potential inequities. So we'll definitely be monitoring the power outage situation, not just in Pelham, but regionally, because everyone knows our staff live all over the region. So just because the school may be okay, if we've got staff that are especially north of 287, where we always tend to have more weather issues, harder, more inclement weather. So we'll be watching that, and definitely will make a call by 7 a.m. We're doing that call a bit later, only because nobody has to travel. As we've already announced, the campuses themselves will be closed tomorrow, so students and staff are to be home no matter what. And we'll make the call first thing in the morning about whether we will be remote learning or whether we will have a traditional snow day. I just wanted to explain a related matter. In the email that we sent out earlier this week, we have a new feature on the calendar this year, some contingency days, and those are listed in May. So the way that those are relevant now is they directly correlate with snow days. If we don't take any snow days in a given year, then we will have 2 additional basically vacation days around the Memorial Day weekend, be a nice 5-day weekend. If we take 1 snow day, then we will still have 1 extra day around Memorial Day. If we take 2 or more snow days, then it'll just be a regular 3-day Memorial Day weekend, which we're very used to. But direct correlation between those decisions that we make today and tomorrow and the next days to what we may have available to us come the spring. So that's weighing into the decision tonight as well. But you'll be hearing something one way or another by 7 a.m. tomorrow, so stay tuned. I'm going to steal a little bit of Jim's thunder today. I'm not going to steal all of it, but I haven't had an opportunity in a long time to talk about our construction projects. And we've had a bond steering committee meeting that Jessica is going to update us on, and Jim as well. And I know Russ Davidson will be joining us later tonight to be part of that conversation. Really just great news. Despite the challenges that we've had in 2020, we have seen great progress on all of our projects. And I am so proud of our construction team. our internal team, Jim, John Condon, our board members on bond steering, our principal, Trish Fitzgerald, who's been navigating really tricky waters facility-wise, as well as our construction team. And that's Russ and his team, as well as Kevin and Frank from Triton. We are actually on and or a little bit ahead of schedule with our construction project, especially at Hutchinson, and we are well within budget. And I think those are two incredibly important facts. And I know I just stole Jess's thunder on that. But those are some two things to be incredibly as a board and as a district and as a community. We're being able to build what we promised to our community. Jim will be filling in some of the pieces of the other projects that we're looking for some approvals on tonight. And we're excited that the remaining projects in the bond will be starting in the very near future. I'll let them fill in details. But I will say it was exciting today. We had coordination meetings related to the Hutchinson project, Prospect Hill project, and middle school, high school project. And it was really nice to be talking about things like timelines for boxing things up to move and fencing things off so we can finally begin construction at Prospect Hill. And once again, brushing off all the coordination plans for the middle school, high school for the third year in a row. I think this will be finally the year that we make the move. And we'll finally get those projects done and look forward to their completion. But mostly tonight for my report, I actually wanted to open up a bit of a discussion with the board related to the update on kind of the status of schools during COVID and the challenges that we've been facing. As I said, our teachers are continuing to do outstanding work day in and day out, despite so many challenges, despite the hard work of teaching to 3 different audiences when they're working in hybrid. They're literally still recreating their curriculum day in and day out, learning new tools and techniques and going with the flow tremendously. Certainly, we've seen cases rise, and Julia's going to give us an update of where we are as a district. And of course, as those cases rise, that presents logistical issues, health issues, and fear and concern issues on everyone's part, rightly so. Julie is also going to share with us an update on virtual students. We've had more students shifting to virtual ahead of the holidays. Certainly, we've been very flexible with parents. We want parents as partners and want to work together to navigate through these difficult days. But what we have been seeing is many students switching to virtual for the week or two here leading into the holidays, proactively knowing their own family's plans. And again, our teachers have been coming and doing the work. We need to, I think, face some realities about the fact of what's coming up in the holidays. As we saw on Thanksgiving, there were gatherings, there were family get-togethers. And we need to, I think, talk a little bit and think about those potential implications for the upcoming holidays that are in front of us. Steve is going to provide a staffing update for us. And then our thought exchange, I just want to remind, I don't have a thought exchange review for the board tonight because that is still open, but I will remind our staff and our families that thought exchanges are open through Friday if you'd like to go back and restart thoughts or add additional thoughts. We will be analyzing that once it's complete. So one thing, and Julia, I'm going to ask your opinion on this. I should have asked you ahead, but I didn't. One thing I did want to do tonight, because we know, and Jessica already mentioned this, we do continue to struggle with, going back and forth between remote and hybrid. And in every case, really, it's been based on staffing issues. So I wanted to give a little scenario of walking through what contact tracing does to staffing and how that plays into our decisions to open or close. So Julia, let me ask you a quick question. Do you think I should walk through that now, or do you want to set the stage with some of your information and come back to that?
Whichever. Fine.
Okay.
Would you like for me to give an example of how that is done? Or?
I've got a little bit of an example I put together. Why don't you start with how it's approached, and then maybe I'll give a specific example from a student schedule of what that might look like.
So in terms of contact tracing?
Yeah, just how the process initiates, what you then go through.
Sure. So typically, we'll have either a staff member or a student who tests positive, and they let their building principal know. So at that point, the building principal contacts me And we start looking at, if it's a student, then we'll look at the list of the classes that they go to. If it's elementary, obviously, it's really one classroom. We have several different teachers depending on when we have to kind of do contact tracing. So basically, what questions that we have to ask is typically, if it's a student or even if it's a staff member, when did the test actually take place? Because typically somebody may just be doing regular testing, and if that's the case and they were asymptomatic, we would be contact tracing 48 hours prior to the day of the test. So if the test was done on a Friday, then no matter when the positive test came back, we will be going back to Friday and looking at Thursday and Wednesday. So we will be asking the question to the individual or to the parent, where was this individual on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday? And those 3 days would be what we would actually consider contact tracing. So we'll be asking, where was the student before school, during school, after school? We look at the student schedule to determine all of the classmates, all of the teachers that the student may have come in contact with, or even the monitors that may be in the classroom. We also think about the lunchtime. So where did the student eat? Who are the students that were sitting around the student? If it was middle or high school, they will be in a cafeteria somewhere. So we ask about all those things. So if it happens to be on a weekday, typically we have a lot of days to look at, and we may have anywhere between 3-4 kids to individuals to possibly up to even 100 people that has to quarantine, because it could be that the person was here, was asymptomatic, and was in school for 3 days. So that would be the most challenging situation. If the student was symptomatic, so the previous case was asymptomatic. If the student was symptomatic, then that means that typically, even though they may have started having symptoms, let's say on a Wednesday, they might have waited until Thursday or Friday to get tested. So if that's the case, we don't just go to the day of the test, but we actually go to the day that the symptoms started. So if, let's say, the student started having symptoms on a Wednesday night, then we will be looking at 2 days prior to that. So we'll be looking at Tuesday and Monday, and then asking all the same questions. Was the student in school? Who did the student come in contact with? Are there people that the student, came in contact with outside of school? Because you should let those families know. So we talk about the entire day from the morning till the evening. We go through the entire scenario of where the student was. And the same thing goes for staff members as well. If it's a staff member who is positive, then we have to walk through the entire day for that staff member. Which classrooms, which offices, was there an administrator in your classroom? Because we also need to know if an administrator came in to do an observation, then that person also has to get quarantined. So we look at every, it would be really great if we all wore like a video camera so that we know exactly where we were all day long, every single day, and contact tracing will be so much easier. But since that's not the case, we just have to sit there and we ask all the questions, where did you go? What happened? What about lunch? Who do you typically sit with? And all of that. So those are all the questions that we ask. In terms of quarantining, I know parents are always asking, so if it was somebody and I know who it is and that individual sits on the other end of the classroom, for us, it really doesn't matter where you are sitting in the classroom, because what the Department of Health is telling us is, in terms of quarantine, in order to really minimize the risk, we want to make sure that everybody who's within the enclosed area, like a classroom or office, for everybody to be quarantined. Depending on where you are to the individual, obviously, the level of risk is going to be either lower or higher. But given that in our classrooms, we have masks, we have social distancing, we have dust dividers, we also have the placemats, we have so many layers that the risk itself is really low. However, we still have to go through the process of identifying who were these individuals who were in the same enclosed area. So we do end up with many, many people quarantining, possibly, especially for secondary schools, because a student, may have 6 or 7 different classes. And we're looking at not just one day, but if we're looking at 3 days or even 2 days of contact tracing, then, depending on the day, sometimes you have a phys ed classes versus science lab class. So you may be adding more classes in depending on, what the schedule looks like. But Cheryl, go ahead.
Perfect chance for me to jump in. So, for example, what we did, we pulled just a typical 10th grade schedule. Student, certainly not going to name names, but an example of a 10th grade student. This student does not happens to have no 0 period class and actually no first period class. Most of our students do. This one doesn't. But so a student, 10th grader, might typically have health, global 1, English 10, chem honors, one of those, physical education, or on an opposite day, chem lab, lunch, as Julia said, algebra 2, and Spanish. Very typical 10th grade schedule. So if that student, for example, was tested positive on one, or we needed to contact trace based on that student's presence in the school, that is 8 different teachers right there that I just listed off. Health, global, English, chem, physics, physical education, algebra, Spanish. I'm sorry, that's 7 teachers, plus a lunch period. So if it was 7 teachers, each of those teachers teaches at least 5 classes. So 7 teachers are now out of commission, plus the 35 classes that they would have taught now need to be covered. So this is where we start to get into staffing issues. One assumption in that is that maybe those were all general education classes. Very often we have students in co-taught classes, our integrated co-teach. So something like global, English, science, and math might have also had a co-teacher with them. So if that was the case, now you're up to 11 teachers from that same one child. And again, those 11 teachers have likely 5 different teaching periods, most of which will now need to be covered. And again, too, you're also looking at, even with cohorted, if you use an average of 15 students per class, you're looking at least 100 students that are now quarantining from one student being exposed. So if you've got 100 students quarantined, if you've got 7 teachers quarantined, you've now got 35 classes you need to cover. If you've got 12 teachers, 11 or 12 teachers, you now have about 60 classes that need to be covered from that one exposure. As Julia said, there could be other people. Maybe an administrator was in the room doing an observation. Maybe there's a one-to-one monitor that does work in there, or the student spent time with one of the monitors in the cafeteria in close proximity. Maybe the guidance counselor was in the classroom doing a presentation, or maybe the student visited their guidance counselor for 15 minutes that day. Maybe they spent some time in one of the offices and there's a clerical that might be impacted. And then there's our custodians. They're in the cafeterias, they're cleaning our classrooms. They are in close proximity to our students. So those are all the different pieces that do impact quarantine, but that also impact the running of the schools. So potentially now, let's say worst case scenario, and actually the high school administrators had said to me prior to COVID, the largest number of coverages they've ever had to deal with in one day is 60. So that's the equivalent of 12 teachers. Again, one child could potentially result in 12 teachers being quarantined, one child. And if we have multiple children or multiple exposures, that's where we start to run into these staffing issues, because we have multiple people winding up in quarantine, either from exposures within the school, or in many cases, what we've seen is exposure in their private lives, even if they're being absolutely responsible. Maybe their spouse becomes positive or their child becomes positive, and now they've been exposed at home. That plays into it. So in addition to the exposures that we're reporting to our community and the quarantines coming from within the school, we're also dealing with people who now have to quarantine from outside exposure. And that's what's starting to really compound things. Add to that the issues that we're dealing with around childcare leaves. And I'm not sure if everyone understands this. Both state and federal government have passed laws guaranteeing childcare leave due to COVID. And I think that's fair and right and good. And I think that's across the board. It's not just education, but the significant impact that has on education is if anyone who works in the school setting loses their childcare or their child's school closes due to COVID, they are entitled to childcare leave. So that's something that Steve, I think probably on a daily basis, has been navigating those type requests, and he'll be sharing a little bit about that. But what that then does for us is we go through a process of someone requesting a leave. If we can't fill the leave, then of course we want our kids to be taught. So what has resulted most of the time is we then allow an accommodation where that person may be able to work from home because they're completely healthy, working from home, but we still have to cover those classes. So that adds more coverages to the mix. So that is why whenever we're getting, even if it's 1 or 2 cases here and there, especially at the secondary level, that's what adds to the stress and unfortunately has resulted in us having to shift to remote. Julia?
Dr. Champ, you mentioned this last scenario. That could also, this childcare leave could be like if I were a teacher in the school and my son or daughter's school was shut down because it went all virtual, then
Yeah.
I could get leave because I would need somebody to take care of my children at home.
Exactly. And our teachers have been doing an amazing job of scrambling to find that childcare, but every now and then they just can't make it work. So that's when we've been accommodating. And again, they've been providing incredible. We've actually heard from some parents that the instruction when they're fully remote is better than the hybrid instruction, which again is kudos to them for the hard work. But yeah, so that's a lot of what they're balancing. And one more thing I'll add, and I know Julia had something too. Our substitute teachers, we have a limited supply, and then there's been articles in LOHUD. There's been everyone across the region is struggling with substitutes. Substitutes, if we stress them out, they can teach 8 periods a day. So just think if we've got 60 coverages, and that's a good day, and only like 2-3 substitutes, we're not covered. So that's where our teachers now are also pitching in to cover one another's classes. And I spoke with Miss Antonelli today, and she said she had some teachers doing as many as 2 and 3 coverages today themselves, which means we have teachers who are giving up every free period except maybe their lunch period on days. So that again just shows the dedication and the way that everyone is stepping up in an incredible way, but also the stress and the pressure and the exhaustion, that our folks are experiencing. I just want to recognize that for them too. Julia, I'm sorry I cut you off.
Oh, no, I was going to just say that to the list that you already mentioned, we also have the regular illnesses. Plus, we have the same requirements for adults as well as we do for students. So if any of our teachers are feeling a little bit of a headache or runny nose or coughing, they also have to stay home and go get tested. So for the 2 or 3 days that it's going to take for them to take the test and get the result back, they're also not coming into work, but they are working from home. So that also triggers another coverage at school. So each person that is coming down with any sort of a symptom then adds to this bigger pot of the people that are quarantining.
And I guess we also had the challenge of some shared staff that ends up impacting more than one building.
Correct. Yeah, and that's in particular between the middle school and high school. So yeah, you're absolutely right there. I don't know if we should go to Steve to fill out the
Yeah, that's fine.
Staffing, and then we'll go back to Julia for the COVID cases and virtual teachers. Thanks.
Yeah, this will be a unique innovation 21st century report today. But so I did share some information with the school board last week, and I just want to share now with the community some information to kind of bring some a little bit of a background in terms of what Dr. Champ just mentioned. So we do have a number of teachers this year who have had childcare issues because of their schools where they live have closed or have gone on full virtual because of any quarantine or any situation going on at those schools. So we have made that decision that it's better to have at least that the child's classroom teacher working virtually with the kids who may be in the school, in our school. So we had 16 teachers who have requested that at this point this year, and sometimes there's been some teachers on multiple occasions. But the teachers, to be honest with you, they have been very cognizant that it does stress the learning experience for the kids in our schools. So they are struggling with it just like anyone else last spring who was basically working from home while their kids were also virtual, like we all were last spring. Childcare is a problem, and it also impacts our schools. So roughly about 16 teachers who have asked for that accommodation, and we have granted that. Because again, as Dr. Champ said, conversely, if they took a leave, we would have no teacher. We would have to have a sub. And sometimes with intermittent leaves, it would be very scattered throughout each week. So that's one piece of the data that we have to share. Another piece of it is there are times when some teachers who have asked when the kids are on full virtual, just like we had that at the middle school last week and the high school and also Hutchinson recently, they've asked an accommodation to actually work virtually as well and not come into the building, even though kids aren't there. We've had 11 teachers who've requested that, and then we've granted it. They have been from various reasons, and basically whether it's a health reason or it's a childcare reason. And we've granted that accommodation. Another piece of data is that we have granted 3 teachers, as some of you may know, who have severe health concerns to actually work virtually from home from a couple of weeks ago. And we're going to reevaluate it in February and March and see how that goes. But we've had 3 teachers with that accommodation. That has also happened in many other school districts when they've noticed that the teacher has really had a health issue that challenges them to come to work in this COVID environment, which we have. We've had 4 teachers throughout the year who have actually taken leaves of absences due to COVID related issues. Some full year, some have been for a few weeks. That's not as many as we expected, which is a good thing. But there have been some faculty which needed to take that time, and some of it is deal with health-related issues, and some of that also deals with childcare issues. And they're not working when they're on that leave. Recently, we actually ran a report, attendance report, that focuses on teachers who are working from home due to quarantine. And that could be a quarantine based on issues in their family. It could be quarantine because of connections of people who've tested positive in our schools. So I have updated numbers. Last week, there were 135 instances up until last week, which was about December 8th, of faculty, staff, and administration who have been quarantined, and some of them working from home because of that. That number since last week has increased 41%. So this is sort of the wave that's also come after Thanksgiving. That's a huge number that's increased. Now we have 188 instances where we've had faculty, staff, administrators who had to be quarantined, again, for various reasons, not just because of Pelham, and they've been working from home. We've had about 16 teachers who are actually sick from COVID or actually symptomatic. And we categorize that because they've been not feeling well, they've had to wait for a test, and they've had symptoms of it. So those are the startling numbers. I think the one that's fascinating, it's something that we expected, but the jump from just last week alone, 41%, is kind of startling for me.
Yeah, and I think that likely, Steve, that correlates with the Thanksgiving surge that we're seeing
Yes.
in the numbers, right? Julia, did you want to maybe go to the student number?
Question.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Go ahead, Eileen.
Sorry, if I could just ask one clarifying question about what Steve just told us. The 135 instances, does that mean like a teacher who's been out for 3 days is 3 instances?
No, I just counted by person.
By person. Wow.
Right, so
So it's a lot more of
more
days.
cumulative days of absences. I'm just counting the person who'll be out 3 days or 1 day, and then maybe again hit another time later on in the month. We've had some multiple occurrences as well, but that is basically that one occurrence could count for multiple days out.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll report on the number of positives that we've had since September when school opened. In the secondary schools between middle and high school, we had, and I just need to I do want to say that the numbers that I will be sharing are the numbers that we are aware of. So, obviously we may have, students or adults, well, I guess mostly students who might have tested positive, but if that didn't impact us at all, we may not know about it if the parents didn't reach out to us. But the ones that we do know about, which we report to the state, between middle and high school, we had a total of 22 positives since September, 9 teaching and non-teaching staff in the middle and high school since September. In the 4 elementary schools, we had a total of 12 students that tested positive and a total of 9 adults who tested positive. Now, out of these numbers, majority of them actually did test positive around starting from about Thanksgiving. So if I look at just high school from November 23rd up until 2 days ago, we had 16 students who tested positive. And then 6 adults who tested positive. So it's actually majority of them have been in the last 3 weeks. So, it is obviously, it has been getting more, the numbers have been increasing, but it certainly has been a lot more because of Thanksgiving. And so I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens with the holiday break. But that is kind of the numbers that we have. In terms of attendance and enrollment and the number of students that are virtual, across the 6 buildings, it is the lowest is 6.16% at Siwanoy, and the highest is at the high school with 28% who are virtual. And so the total across all 6 buildings is a little less than 20%. So right now we have 19.5% of our students who are fully virtual.
And I would add, remember, we started the year with less than 10% choosing fully virtual.
That was across the district, less than 10%.
Yes, that was a district average. Yep. Any questions or thoughts on, that was a lot of data.
There was a lot of data. I have a question.
Okay, good. Sorry.
The increase in people choosing to go remote, is that distributed across the grade, or is that more in the middle school, in the secondary school level?
So right now, the total, the high school is 28%. Middle school is 21%. The next highest is Hutchinson at 20%. And then Prospect at 8, Colonial at 11, Prospect at 8, and Siwanoy at 6. So it is mostly secondary schools that are the highest.
And I would say, I know from speaking to the secondary principals, and Julie and Steve, if you have him from the elementaries, feel free to share too. They have shared that a lot of the recent shift to full virtual is in preparation for the holidays. People, I think one of 2 things, they don't want to wind up quarantined like they did at Thanksgiving, because if you recall, we did have to quarantine, I think it was 50 teachers by the time it was all said and done. And I think at least 100, 150 students through Thanksgiving as a result of some cases. So there's some proactive not wanting to have to quarantine through the holiday. But I think the other bigger one is, I think, and we'll just be honest about it. People are planning to travel, and they're pre-quarantining before they either travel or spend holidays with family. And I think that is one of the biggest concerns that we have. We can only control what we can control. And I know we all have, we all make the choices for ourselves. But I think in light of the bumps that we've seen, the surges we've seen following Thanksgiving, and knowing that people are planning to do some traveling, I do think we need to think seriously about our return after the break and what that should look like for us, because we want to, as I said, I'll say again, our staff have been here. They have been doing their darndest to be here and really to be here for our kids and our parents. We so appreciate that. I think we need to think about how do we take care of everybody on the other side of this, so that we can break whatever cycle we might see coming back in January. How do we bend whatever curve might be there for ourselves? knowing that people are going to be traveling.
I mean, one thing that weighs on my mind, in addition to what you said about taking care of everybody, is it's been, as you've noted, a very clunky stretch between really since Halloween for us with these class closures, building closures, a lot of communication on this. And, you know, while we are still going to be very much in the thick of things, as I mentioned in my opening comments in January, it would be nice to think that we could do something to try and start like with as much of a fresh slate as possible. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but like the thought that we could be off for 2 weeks for our set vacation and then come back and then 2 or 3 days in, because we're right in the midst of the surge that everybody is predicting, have to shut down a building or a whole district to go, I say shut down, but go all virtual. Leaves me feeling a little unsettled or uncertain.
What are you hearing from your colleagues in other districts on this topic?
I do think a lot of districts are struggling with this same exact concern. A number of districts are seriously considering staying closed an additional week. I've even seen as long as 2 weeks. Not everybody. Some are still debating. Some have made the decision to do that. But you know, there is, and they're looking at, you know, where is Christmas and what's 2 weeks for, you know, incubation period, what's 14 days after that, or the quarantine period. So Christmas, you know, if you 2 weeks after that would somewhat correlate to staying out an additional week after the break. If you look at New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, you know, if you go out 14 days from that, that's an additional 2 weeks. You know, we're looking at, you know, studies and data. Julia found some data recently that, you know, just showed the amount, how the risk really significantly decreases the longer you go out from exposure. So, you know, we could minimize risk a bit by staying, you know, about 10 days out would minimize our risk down somewhere between 1 to 10%, I think, of increased spread. Versus you go a little bit longer, then you're down really to, I think it was 1 to 3% chance of spread. Julie, I don't know if I captured that correctly.
Yes, it was about 0.1 to 10% after 10 days, and it was actually 0 to 3% span for after 14 days. So it does dramatically decrease.
Yeah. So,
But are those?
there are districts considering and/or doing this.
But I just want to understand, like, that numbers that you're just talking about, you're talking about spread numbers, but it doesn't seem like spread is necessarily our concern as much as exposure is, based on what you're telling us right now, due to the quarantine periods.
No, that's the exposure risk rate.
Oh, that wasn't a spread rate. Okay.
That is from CDC website that I was looking at.
Thank you. I may have misspoken on that, Jessica.
Okay, sorry. It's that's the exposure, percent of people you expect to have been exposed if you go out that far in time. Okay, thank you.
Well, and 2 things I just want to, we've talked a lot about all the quarantines, but like, I know in one of your communications, you did say like at the moment, and other districts said this on the town call, we're not seeing like spread within our schools.
Yep.
Per se. You know, student to student, teacher to student, like this is separate from that. And we also, the other bit is we're using current DOH guidelines in New York State have not shifted to CDC 10-day, right?
Right. Yeah, I just wanted to be sure, because it sounds, everything we're talking about is that exposure and the quarantines and the impact of all the people that are affected, just as Dr. Champ went into, and like how that's really important. I mean, the spread, of course, is important too, but what we've been talking about and what's impacting our schools with the current shutdowns has really been that quarantining and exposure that's coming from a single case.
Yeah.
Julie, you brought up the exposure because you're thinking if you were to make a choice 10 days out after the Christmas holiday or after New Year's, that like you would account for the most number of people who perhaps got exposed to COVID on a holiday. Is that what you were referencing, on the holiday, and might bring it back to school?
Yeah, that's exactly the thinking. Yeah, and you know, when Jessica, would think what you bring out is a really important point, because we haven't seen student to student spread, and I think everyone is agreed, and there's a lot of science around schools being generally safe, or the the places where there is little spread, the challenge is exactly what we're talking about. That doesn't account at all for the challenges amongst the adults, the staffing issues, and spread that does occur from outside of the schools that finds its way in through everyone, but predominantly we're seeing it with adults. And we are seeing a little bit of an impact from youth sports outside of school, not as much as other schools have seen, but that is outside exposure of students as well is what's really mostly driving these cases. Julia, is that still accurate from your contact tracing at this point that we haven't seen student to student or student to staff that we're aware of?
Right, that is correct. I'm sure there probably is some sort of a relationship, possibly minimally, but we haven't seen any direct relationship. And again, when it comes to students, what's challenging is, kids are spending time together on weekends and we may not necessarily know. So there could be possibly student to student exposure, but not within the classroom that we could see on campus.
So then I guess we also have the unknown variable about what Jess was talking about in her opening remarks about the microcluster zone that we may or may not have to deal with those requirements when we're opening.
Yeah, the state did release new zones a couple days ago. And shockingly, there was only about, I think, 3 new areas of the state identified. So I guess when you redefine the zones, then I guess you can get whatever outcome you'd like. But thankfully, we were not identified as a zone, so we're not in a position yet of having to initiate the surveillance testing.
Did you want me to talk a little bit about what that might potentially look like if we do in the zone?
Yes, please, that'd be great.
So a few weeks ago, we did send out a survey or consent for parents and staff to let us know if they would be willing to volunteer. And we actually had a great turnout. I would say about half of the students, the families have said yes, which is really helpful. And what we were thinking at that point in the beginning, when we were planning this, I was thinking about doing this during the school day, which is why we sent out that consent so that we could get pre-consent prior to us having to do it. But the more we thought about it, and Dr. Champ has shared with me that one of the other districts, they actually did a testing on a Monday morning. They did a delay and did a testing on a Monday morning, because what that would do is that would cut out the contact tracing. So I was thinking about that, and I think I have actually changed my plan to, instead of doing this during the day, because if we were to take a student out during the day, and let's say a student or a teacher tests positive, that means we would have to then send that student home, the rest of the class. If it's secondary schools, it'll be all of the kids that the student has been to class with. Plus, we have to look at the last 2 days, send all the teachers home, find coverage, which could also trigger closure. So what I was thinking is that depending on when we get designated a zone, I think the best way to do this would be do this on a Wednesday afternoon for either cohort A or B, and then also Saturday for like a cohort A situation, so that if we were to go 48 hours prior to the day of the testing, then we wouldn't have to contact trace. So I want to minimize the contact tracing as much as possible, so they wouldn't have to send kids home or teachers home, or have to even close the school potentially. So the only problem is testing adults. They're here every single day. And so it doesn't really matter what day we test them, other than possibly a Monday morning. That will be the only time that we could possibly test them and then not have to contact trace, and it wouldn't impact anybody else other than that individual. So that's kind of, we haven't quite figured that part out yet. But in terms of students, Wednesday afternoon would probably be the best time, because it'll be either cohort A or B who would have been in that Wednesday morning. So it would just make it easier, much easier for us to test and then only impact a very small group of people. And this way also, I know many parents have also asked if they could be here. Well, this way parents would actually sign up for a time in the Wednesday afternoon slot or Saturday slot. So the parents can bring the children to us, and then we would go through the testing.
So I have a question. Do we know, I know there was some percentages thrown around before. So yellow is 20% every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks. And orange is 30% every 2 weeks?
Orange
that's
is also
20%
yellow.
a month. So less testing.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. I keep reading it and it seems different every time I read it, but maybe that's me.
And the red zone is 30% over the month.
Okay, so it's 20%. So 20%, how many people is that?
If it was everybody, you'd be looking at about 600. But again, with so many people on virtual, it only has to be 20% of staff and students who are coming in person at any point in time. So
Okay,
we're more. I think we're closer to 550.
So, okay. So then I could easily see that in the time when we're out for holidays, that we could become a yellow zone or an orange zone. So we would then have to test before kids could come back to school, right?
The way that they've written, and Julia, correct me if I'm wrong, the way that they've written the regulations, you can open while you do the testing. You can test, say it's an orange or a red zone. You can spread the testing over the course of the month. They do ask you to equitably distribute it, so it's about half of the testing over 2 weeks, the remaining half of the testing over the following 2 weeks. But you can remain open that entire time as long as you're on track to complete your 20% or your 30% over the course of the month. So we would not have to test before we opened.
When the indicators were first laid out, it was in order to reopen, you had to do this testing and prove your rate was lower than your
Yes.
region rate. But now you can stay open. I think the notion is that schools are safe places and I don't want to do more to shut us down, correct?
Yes, that's
Not
right.
accounting for the substitute coverage issue.
Yeah, Julia?
May I just also add, we could also accept outside testing results. So if parents and staff, if they choose to go the outside route, once we're designated a zone, everything counts. So they just have to send the results to the school nurse and then we'll be able to count those numbers into our percentage.
And rapid tests count for surveillance, not for reentry to school, right? But
Yes, because it's the rapid test that we're going to be given from Department of Health to do.
I mean, the way things are going, I think it's highly likely that we could end up in a zone before, maybe before the holidays, but very possibly within the holidays. So then there's not going to be anybody around to sort of figure out what we're doing. We should have a plan before that might happen.
Julia, do you want to just share a bit more about your work with the nurses?
Yes, we actually do have a plan. For each team of testers, we're planning on having 2 nurses, a monitor, and a clerical staff because we need to take care of all of the consent forms. The kit that we're going to be using, Binax Now kit, it actually is a 15-minute result test. And so what happens is we have to test it, we have to do the test, put it into the kit, and it has to be read exactly in 15 minutes. And so we're going to need 2 nurses to kind of keep track of that. And so we're going to need several teams of 2s. And since we have 6 nurses and we have 2 sub-nurses who are also willing to help us, we're going to try to manage it that way where we try to have anywhere between 2 to 4 teams and do the testing. So depending on when we get designated, I'm going to look at the Wednesday to see which cohort we could test. And then we'll definitely test the cohort A on a Saturday. And then we have to work out which Monday we're going to be doing, which Monday we're going to be using to test all of the staff, if that's the route we want to go. We may have to have a slight delay on a Monday just so that we have a couple of hours to get some of the teachers in so that it doesn't impact, having to send kids home and teachers home. But that part we can work out.
And I'll just add one more piece. I think at last count, we had just over 1,300 students that we already have consent for. So what we would do is randomly select our 20% or 30% from those who've already consented. And of course, we'd work with our staff too. We've asked for volunteers first as well. So just a matter of randomizing those and making the connection to schedule the appointments.
So definitely a lot to consider and think about.
But it sounds from what I'm understanding that the governor it happens at a particular time. They will reassess the zones, or is it still like we could end up in a zone at any minute?
I think it appears that they are reassessing them and announcing them periodically.
Okay.
My guess is they're assessing at any moment, but they're not announcing it until they're ready to announce.
So knowing that schools are closed, if he's being strategic about the announcements, my guess is he's not going to announce when schools are closed.
Well, my guess, I think the biggest move is he didn't announce while we're open right now. I think we all fully expected the entire county to be in orange. And not only did that not happen, none of us even moved into yellow with the most recent announcement. So that doesn't seem to mesh with, again, the data that we're experiencing, but they've been changing the various metrics. And I think that's what has kept our county from moving more towards yellow or orange.
So is there a higher minimum percentage?
They've added metrics like hospitalization rate in addition to infection rate. So yeah, I don't have those at the top of my head, but yeah, I think there was a strategic move to not wind up closing schools before the holiday break, because I know the governor is very much committed to keeping schools open as much as possible.
So since we're having this conversation about testing, I just thought maybe I would throw out, we did at one point pay to have students tested right before school opened, and maybe that's something we talk about as well. Just throwing it out there.
Thanks, Leah.
I mean, the tricky thing there is, testing is testing, right? What are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to get like a snapshot of, we're trying to assume that everybody who walks in the door doesn't have COVID. The only real reliable thing to do would be to ensure that everybody is at home and self-isolating for a certain number of days before they test, and that's not something we can do, right? Or expect of people or control. So, it came at a pretty big cost to the district when we did it last time, from what I understand. That would be my concern, but that's just me.
I'm not advocating for it. I know it's something that, colleges are doing testing on a regular basis, and before you go back, you have to be tested, and people are doing it for traveling. So I just thought I'd throw it out as a possibility. I mean, not an expensive possibility, but just a thought.
These aren't the same test, though. Are they $100 a piece, or what's the cost of them?
The PCRs are around 100. When we did the testing back in September, the board approved us up to 100,000, just to be sure, $100,000. I don't think we've gotten, Jim, we haven't gotten the final bill on that, because I think the process was that they would then bill back to insurance, and we had a lot of folks not provide their insurance, so there was some effort to track that down to minimize the cost to the district. Certainly, we don't want to pass that cost on to families, but by the same token, insurance does cover those tests. But we were forecasting anywhere from, I'm going to say, 50 to 75,000 potentially that the district had to pay for those September exams.
So am I understanding correctly that we had less people offer their insurance than we anticipated?
Yes. Jim, was it about 45% that actually provided insurance?
Yes. The initial amount was very, very low, lower than what they've seen in testing centers. So that's why they were going back, and they were going to recontact folks. And we've not yet heard from them what that final number is going to be.
So don't people understand that if they don't offer their insurance, then the school district pays, and it's coming out of taxes and stuff, whereas if the insurance company pays, it's not?
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, everybody has a different health insurance plan. I know in some places you've got high deductible health care plans, And some folks in those instances, if they've not yet hit those deductibles, they may be responsible for costs. So I suspect that may be something that's driving part of it.
Well,
in those-
don't forget, it was just the high school, and they were high schoolers before school had even begun. So no matter how many times I texted our insurance number to my student, it's possible it didn't get handed over. I know I double checked in my situation, but not everybody might have appreciated that their student wouldn't have handed over that very important number.
So, Dr. Champ, I noticed that we have our guest, Mr. Davidson,
Yes.
on. So, I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, I think it was a healthy discussion. Thank you for everybody's patience on this. I know it
Yeah.
took a long time, but
And I guess
Whatever.
I guess the real question is, do we want to consider a delayed return from the vacation? That's really the question and the guidance that we're looking for from the board. I do think there's a lot of rationale to support doing that. And I think everyone knows I've been trying to keep schools open and trying to keep kids here as much as possible. So it feels very contrary to that goal to even make that recommendation. But I do have genuine concerns for our staff. And again, no judgments on anything that anyone is doing, but I do have genuine concerns. And for students that return back to the holidays, if there's additional spread.
I think we have to keep the needs of the staff in mind. I mean, I think that these have been very difficult weeks and months, and that we should make sure that we're proceeding with an abundance of caution. So I do think that we should consider it.
Is there a timeline or a time frame on which this decision would be made, or that you need, I don't know, one way or another?
I honestly, I think we probably really need to make that decision before. And we
I
don't.
agree.
Yeah.
We don't.
Could affect people's plans.
Well, I guess that's one of my concerns with the extension affecting people's plans. Like you now have an extra week of guaranteed remote time. Do people change their plans to include more travel in that time? I mean, that's not the goal of this, clearly, but I think that's the other thing that goes along with the shutdown. It's a difficult topic to talk about, for sure. I know we all want our kids back in school as much as possible, but we all have to be responsible about it too.
So let me understand, if we stay out an extra week, then that will allow us to understand the implications of the holidays on the rate of exposure, or the rate of
I think that will give us 1 week. I think will give us similar to basically that bump that we saw after Thanksgiving that Steve talked about on the staffing side and the quarantines, and Julia talked about on the student exposure, on the exposure side, student and staff. 1 week's time, extra week, I think would allow us to get through that bump. Going another week would be probably even more conservative if you wanted to consider that. That is maybe a little too much of a stretch when you try to balance the, as Jessica said, the learning needs of kids being out of school and being fully remote. That's, I think, the question that most boards are looking at is, do you stay out an extra week to ride that bump and get beyond that?
It's more for an issue of quarantining, though, right? Because the number of cases are going to be the number of cases, but the number of people affected by it through quarantine, it might be through their quarantine period, more people, if that's the idea.
Yeah, and also I think, and Julia can speak better to this, it also would give the opportunity for symptoms to start to show before people have come back into the school environment.
So what's the first day back? Is it the 5th? I mean, the 4th, sorry.
Currently, it's scheduled to be the 4th, yeah.
And so a week later would be the 11th, which is just past 2 weeks from Christmas. 2 weeks from Christmas is the 8th. So then the 8th is Friday.
About 10 days after New Year's Day, right? About 10 days after New Year's Day.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, as a board, I think we have to make what we think is the best, most rational decision, and we have to trust, which is hard to do, that the community is going to feel a sense of social responsibility and do the right thing. But I don't think that we can make rules based on the feeling that people aren't going to follow them. We have to just make the rules and expect people to do the right thing, which to me is to wait a little bit. Like, I wouldn't do 2 weeks from New Year's. I think that's too much, but I think extending a week is legit. I think it's enough to get you something, and it's the least that gets you something.
I think I agree with what several people have said, that everybody shares the same goal, which is having students in person as much as possible. And I know that Jess said something when she spoke about thinking forward and strategizing maybe for later on in the spring, making some changes in that regard. But I'm also really mindful of something else that Jessica said, which is if we do open and then we get back in the situation where we're quarantining people right after we open, that seems to me almost worse. That
counterproductive, it feels like, and that's like.
And I think psychologically for the teachers, that's really difficult. That everybody gears up to go back to school, and then we're out again, and then we have the staffing challenges, and it feels exhausting after we've just tried to refresh.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
I think what Eileen's saying, with that 1 week, that gives you the 2 weeks from Christmas. It gives you 10 days from New Year's Eve. I mean, although it's not the guidelines that we have to follow as a district, it is like a state guideline that's out there. So it can give you some sort of a comfort level to the exposure of which we would be bringing back into the school on that Monday, as opposed to the Monday before. And I think that would be a reasonable extension, but I wouldn't go the 2 weeks either.
So I view this as a mitigation of the effects of the holidays, to try and give ourselves some breathing room, both for, quarantine people coming back and for symptoms to show so that people don't show. I'm a little concerned by the point that Jess brought up earlier about was just going to give them another week to see family and friends. But I guess I have more faith that people will try and do the right thing, and everybody has their family units that they are forming and form their bubble, and I think people are scared. I don't see a wholesale disregarding of this. So I would be inclined to do it. I think I'm a little nervous. I think the mitigation idea of this makes sense. There's a logic to it. But it's it's unexplored territory.
Like everything we're doing right now.
Yeah, like everything. So, but I understand the logic of it. I think the logic is sound.
Okay, so I'm hearing from. I think I'm hearing a consensus, even though we're not voting, that it's something we should seriously consider for a lot of the reasons stated. So, is that the end of your report? Again, thank you, everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to add, one more related piece. I know it's going to frustrate folks to stay home, especially those parents that have been so desperately wanting their kids back in. I know, just so that especially the elementary parents know, we're starting conversations at the elementary level about trying to craft a plan of how do we get from where we are, which is when we come back from the break, it'll be full remote for a week. How do we start then, especially as vaccines start to roll out, as hopefully regionally we'll see the curve start coming back down. How do we now phase back towards bringing our kids back beyond 50%, beyond our hybrid model? So, and we're working with the principals on trying to map something out between January and the end of the school year about how do we start to get those kids back in, because we want to have a plan going forward to get from nothing back to everything. because again, we want our kids back in school, especially our youngest learners. So we're going to try to find a plan that will get them back sooner once we get past this hardest part of the winter. So please know for the parents out there with that concern, we are hearing that concern, and we're going to be working on a plan, and we'll hope to bring that to the board. We'll probably also, and again, if anyone's watching, be looking for, I know we've got many parents who are doctors. One thing I really would love to do is just to tap into some of the local expertise about to get some medically based, not even like the logistics, but medically based guidelines that we should be looking for as milestones. If we're going to start increasing the density of the number of students in the school, we need to do that based on science. So what are things that we should be watching for that would say, okay, the time is right to to bring some more students in. So we'll be working on those plans over the next month or so and be coming back to the board with that. So that's the good news.
You're looking for more email, are you?
Normalcy comes in 2021.
I know. And one more piece, I just need to be transparent about this as well. This is maybe the little bit of bad news. We were struggling with staffing at the high school again because of all the quarantines, as I laid out before. We're currently waiting for some test results to come in a few individuals. So there is a chance that we may not have the staff to reopen the high school after the snow is come and gone. I just want to put that out there, just in full transparency. But we'll be actively monitoring that, and we'll communicate that as soon as we have any decisions made.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And that does end my part of the report.
Okay, I didn't mean to rush you along. I see the R in the bottom corner.
Yep. And that covers Julia's report, and it covers Steve's report. So we're on to Julia.
Oh, okay. I was going to make the suggestion. I was going to ask if we could move to Mr. Ricky so that we could have our guest have his piece, and then I'll go back. Well, Jess, I don't know if you want to, I was going to have you do the committee reports. So do you want to just jump in with them? We had a bond steering committee meeting, and this is all going to, I don't know.
Yeah, sure. I can do something really quick. I mean, I know Jim does a great job of covering all the details that I miss. But yeah, the summary of the bond steering committee meeting, we had the meeting last Wednesday morning. We welcomed several new members to the committee, which was great. The big topics of discussion have already been touched on a little bit today. You know, the first item was the bids for Prospect Hill, and those came back very favorable. We'll hear more information about that from Jim and Russ. This was our second time bidding Prospect Hill. We'd bid it about March, right as the pandemic hit, or was about to hit, or right before it hit, I guess. And we decided to delay and go back out again. And so I think the number I heard last week was about 7% better on these bids, which was great. The low bidder was Unimac, who's the same contractor that's working at Hutchinson, and we've been very pleased with their work. And the recommendation from KG&D and from Triton was to go with them, and the bond steering committee agreed with that recommendation and puts that forward to the board tonight for award. And with that award, work there could start as early as January. So this is the project at Prospect Hill, I remember, was for improved accessibility and security vestibule at the entrance. And it also includes elevators for accessibility access. And there's an additional unfinished space above that is included in that bid. What else did we talk about? We talked about Hutchinson as well, got an update of where that is. And given the favorable numbers on the bid for Prospect Hill, several of the open items that we had for Hutchinson are now within budget. And we're also recommending that we go forward and add those things back, fold those back into the bond. We have the money to cover those items that we'd sort of held out as an alternate for a little while. And one of those things that came up also is the furniture procurement and coordination, which KG&D is going to be helping with in the coming year. We're really getting ready to start that move, and there's a lot of coordination, as Dr. Champ mentioned, with Tricia to get everything set and ready to move. So the goal is that we're moving out of the old Hutchinson at the end of June, and that building's coming down in July, and we're going to be in the new Hutchinson in the fall, which is super exciting. And I hope people have gone by and seen the progress. I mean, it's a nice, I mean, I go and walk in the mornings out there to see how it's going. So it's really exciting and fun to see. It's really coming along great, and Triton's been doing a great job. All the contractors are doing a great job. It's all on schedule and stuff, so it's cool. And then I think we talked a little bit about the Glover bids. There's a couple additional things that are happening at Glover, including this drainage pipe that we've discussed needing. I don't have the best description of this. I'll leave that one to Jim, but we can go ahead with it, and we're going to get some bids for it. So that's great. We have the money for that, and as well as a couple of additional things like a bounce back wall for lacrosse that we're looking to put in down there. And that also brings us to the renovations at the middle school, high school. We are on schedule to start those in May, and that's tied a little bit to the renovations at 314 Pelhamdale. So that's wrapping up, and the business offices will be moving over there, so that the rooms are empty at the middle school, high school, so we can start the summer work there, which is great. And then we close the meeting. So I think that was everything. And Jim will fill in, or John can fill in if I miss something. And we'll hear from Russ too, which will be great. So
Thank you, Jess. You got it all. And to add to that a little bit, just today, internally we had started having some more coordination meetings with the principal over at Prospect Hill, just with Triton out there walking the site, so everybody knows how everything's going to look, our safety for our students and our visitors, when the construction is going to begin, communications with our community, with our school community, with our greater community too. And then we talked with Mrs. Fitzgerald at Hutchinson. We talked about moving, which is really something else. And Russ will talk a little bit more about the furniture, but certainly the process of moving and purging and moving over exactly what we need. And we don't want to move things that we don't need. So we need to start that process. And then we did meet with our high school leadership team. What else can they have for a new year? They've got a pandemic, they've got construction. So, let's just add something else in there. But they're certainly excited to learn about that construction and the availability of classroom space that they're going to have next year, because that certainly has become very apparent this year as we've had to flex classrooms due to when we sanitize rooms, we have to move students to other classrooms, and there's not a lot of space. We have a pretty high utilization of our classroom space. Not a surprise to us. We knew that through bond steering, but it's really played out here, and it's a challenge when we have to do that. So tonight we have a couple of items we're going to ask the board to take action on. As Jess said, they were discussed at the bond steering committee meeting. At the same time, we've asked Russ Davidson, our district architect, to come and share some of this information with the board. I think it's a good chance if you've got any questions too. We've really had some great progress, and it is exciting to drive by Hutchinson School. If you haven't done that, I certainly encourage it. If you're looking for another visit, we can certainly help arrange that too. I think they're finishing up. If they haven't finished the roof up, they'll be finishing up very shortly. So we're really moving ahead nicely. So Russ, I'm going to segue right over to you.
Hi, everybody. Good to see everybody in their various rooms. I really wasn't watching television through your whole meeting, so I think Jess and Jim hit a bunch of it. Just back to the overall bond project cost summary, you're doing really well for a very large bond of this, and the strategy to rebid Prospect Hill was a win. It saved you about 7%. We were able to do some value engineering at the same time. We do have two of the key contractors who are working on the new Hutch School, Unimac and Casal, the site contractor, moving over there. So that'll be the third contract that Casal gets, which is the rock removal, the site work, and the field work at Prospect Hill. So they're doing really well. We want to be careful to not get Unimac spread too thin. we've got good assurances from them that they'll have a different super on that job. But as some of you will remember, they were a little bit of an untested entity in New York State school construction, and they have really been true to their word. We still have a long way to go at the new Hutch building, but it is going very well for a project of that scale. You're about 50% done with that project, and you've used less than 25% of your contingency. And that includes adding back a lot of alternates. So most of that money is to add back the kitchen equipment, the gym equipment, the acoustic panels. So you're getting a lot of value there. One thing that didn't come up was this additional high school masonry work. And I don't know if that was going to be authorized tonight or not. But we did look at the request upon steering some feedback from Jess and John you know, a whole set of experts. And I think you've settled on one that will be an excellent choice, and we'll work with them. But just we do believe at this point that that can be funded through the bond, but we're not going to know until that work gets designed and bid. And it needs to be done at some point anyway. So this is a good thing to go forward with the design phase. And it has to do with your main entrance at the high school and the clock tower. So it's right in the front of your building. The original bond, which was, again, scoped out more than 2 years ago, included some sort of, some level of relatively minor repair. And when they went to do that work, they found that that area had deteriorated much further, and it really didn't make sense to do the minor repair. So we have a proposal. There's a proposal in front of you tonight as well to do a more comprehensive redesign of that area, which will replace the window and have a lot of that decorative masonry surround right underneath the clock tower and in the stair refabricated. So that's a big item. But again, you're doing well financially, so we think you can afford that. We think you can probably afford your lacrosse wall. We think you probably can afford your moving expenses. And we've always carried a robust furniture allowance. And I think one of the other things in front of you tonight is we realize as you're going through this very large project that Jim and John Condon already have full-time jobs, and that purchasing almost $1 million worth of furniture and getting all that coordinated in a brand new building is something that they probably could use a little help with. So it's a fairly, I believe, modest proposal, but our interior designer and project architect, because we want to make sure that the desks, you know, match the architecture, and when you go to plug in the copiers, that the copier fits where the plug is, and that's our goal, as well as, frankly, design. You know, we've spent some time with the superintendent and Dr. Garcia looking at next generation learning environments and furniture. A lot of that is built into the design of the building. And we want to make sure the furniture is consistent with that whole approach, which is really going to make the new Hutch School an exemplary building in the whole region. So did I get them all, Jim?
You did. Thank you, Russ.
Russ, can I just ask with Prospect Hill, because I know with our discussions at the end of the year, we were not sure if we could do the second level above the vestibule. So that's back in now.
Thanks for bringing that up. The recommendation in front of you is for the base bid and alternates 1 through 5. So that's a completely finished project. There will be no part of it that is unfinished. The only part that isn't being awarded is alternate number 6, which was some additional single stall toilet room renovation, which was actually never anticipated pre-bond. So you're getting a lot more than you promised to your community with base bid and alternates number 1 through 5, including the finishing of that classroom and conference room and small group space on the 2nd story. So completely finished project with the slate roof, John.
Fantastic. Because to me, I know we were focused on other things in the spring and saw other uncertainties before us. But in my heart of hearts, if we could finish that building architecturally where it mirrored the left side, felt like it would just be that much more beautiful.
Yeah, it's not a complete mirror. You know, as we found out, you know, when we did a little research, which is sort of ironic that building was designed in 1928 and was about to go to bid in 1929 when something else happened in America. And the addition was designed before something else happened. So Prospect Hill's living in a little bit of a strange bit of American history, but the original design had a complete other side, and your stair tower was actually in the center of that building. And in 1929, they lopped off the right side. So you're getting some of it back, but not the full side back.
But much more comprehensive than the very initial thought was.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that Dr. Champ will remember we had about 9 versions of Prospect Hill pre-bond, and at the time when the bond was refined, it was sort of the minimal one. Let's get a security entrance, let's get an elevator, and stop. Yep. I think we made a wise decision to open up that scope, and through careful planning and prioritization from everybody, you can afford it.
Russ,
oh, sorry.
I apologize. I was going to ask Russ to talk about the timeline eventually.
Yeah, so this is along that line, maybe. But Jess, I think I heard, Jess Young, I think I heard you say that demolition of the building is still possible is possible in the best case scenario. Russ, you're feeling the same way about that?
Yeah, the new Hutch project is actually tracking right on schedule, which is good. The main roof over the classroom wing is about 50% done, and tonight's snow will stop that for a few days. So we do expect there to be a little bit of a slowdown, which in mid-December is not unusual. But you know, the windows were early. That building is probably 2 to 3 weeks away from being weather tight, 100%, which means temporary heat goes in and they start wiring and doing finishes. So it's going really well. We got to get this furniture ordered. We've got to get this move figured out because your building, I believe, is going to be ready. Which is very cool. It can start right away because it starts outside, and Prospect Hill's going to have a slow start because we need to move your fuel oil tank, fuel oil lines, and your main gas service before we can put in your foundations. So there's a bunch of stuff to get out of the way there, and that can be done while school is in session. Because it you know, it's all clean switchovers and it's outside of your area, and there's no classrooms adjacent to the Prospect Hill addition, which is good.
Leah, you have some news to report back to your PTA meeting. Thanks so much. I just said you have some great news to report back at your next Prospect Hill PTA meeting.
Absolutely.
As does Sue at hers. Okay, great. Are there additional things to add? Any questions?
I just want to thank Russ again. He and his team have done an outstanding job from the get-go, and all that hard work is paying off beautifully now. We're in a great place, and it's really exciting to be having these conversations and making those last decisions. The end is in sight, and we're going to have a new school this fall.
I just that's just amazing. That like
I also just wanted to comment that you know, last March and February when those bids came in, it was looking pretty grim. We just, you know, they were all over budget. Nothing was going to work. So putting off that and with the hope that COVID wasn't going to take everything, but with the understanding that it might change the building construction industry a little bit and enough to be favorable for us. That was the right move to make.
Yeah,
It was bad for everybody else, but it was good for us.
yeah.
Eileen?
You're also doing really well with material supplies, because we have several jobs that are hung up with COVID problems getting materials. We don't seem to have had that at the New Hutch job, probably because it's a larger project. But it's the first project in my career where the windows were early to the job site.
Eileen, you were trying to say something, I think. Did you say? Sorry, everybody sounded off.
It was amazing, and I can't believe that the time has gone so seemingly quickly. I'm not building a thing, but it's just so impressive, and I'm so grateful.
Agreed. I think there's truly seeing that there's going to be some hope in 2021. I know we're all hanging our hats on a much happier year ahead, and that this is proof that something wonderful will occur in the next year.
Yeah, more fun in 21. That's where we're going with.
Yes. And amazing things are happening.
It would be hard to be less, actually.
That's so true.
Progress was occurring in 2020, which is good to know.
Yeah. Russ, thanks for being with us tonight. We appreciate
Thank you so much.
the
And
update.
your patience with us.
You're
Jim,
welcome.
did you have anything else, Jim, to add before we move on?
Not for this item, just on my general report. I can certainly touch on a couple of items if that's helpful.
Okay. If there's anything else you need to add, go for it.
All right, thank you.
You're up.
Just as Russ said, we are out to bid, and Jess said it too. We are out to bid on the Glover project. That will include the drainage pipe. We had the walkthrough. We had 6 vendors come through, which is great. And then there was discussion at Facilities Committee, and as you know, we've talked about it on steering now, about adding a lacrosse bounce back wall. We're looking at the vicinity where the field house is. So the Russ's engineers are working on that now, and they think have to do some soil sampling there to make sure we have suitable soils. But that's something we also think that the budget will be able to handle. On tonight's agenda, we've asked you to approve the renting pool space for the YMCA if we're able to go through with our swim season this year. Past years, we've used Sarah Lawrence, and understandably, many institutions are choosing not to rent their facilities. So we feel pretty grateful that we've got a space with the YMCA, and Christian Hodges has gone out and made that connection. So a little bit more expensive than what we've had to pay in the past, but the supply is down significantly, and we can certainly manage it because we've not incurred other expenses on our athletic budget. Russ mentioned his items, the 2 additional work proposals that are in there for the additional work for KG&D related to furniture. That expense can certainly be absorbed within the furniture budget part of our project, and then the masonry and facade additional work is part of that residual unspent budget that we believe we can certainly pay for that part of the front end of this work with, and then depending on the scope, we'll see where we are with the budget. We've also got our tuition students. This is an annual process where we do have students from outside the district who attend our school district and pay tuition, usually from 3 different sources, either children of staff members, children who come from other school districts, and the parents just choose to pay for them to attend Pelham if we have space, and then for special education students. But again, in these instances, we accept students where we have space available, and we don't add cost we don't add internal cost when we bring on tuition students. So it's almost as if we've got a little extra capacity and we're able to sell that capacity. So that's also on our agenda for today. And then included with our financial plans, we have our annual update to our long range plan. This is something that we've done annually. And really, it's just, it's a plan that gives you a broad, high-level view of our financial landscape for the next 5 years, based on a set of assumptions which has been shared with you. We look at prior trend information. We forecast our anticipated revenues, look at our anticipated contractual increases. And this is something we look at year over year, and we revise it year over year. And then once approved by the board, we also put that on our webpage with our other published reports. It's another one of those requirements from the state, certainly available for all to look for visibility. And then there's one other item on the agenda which looks familiar because it is. It has to do with our corrective action plans, which the board did approve at a previous meeting. We submitted those plans to the state and were informed that we needed to add completion dates to those reports. I shared that information with some of my colleagues around the county. They were surprised by this too. So now everybody's adding dates to their reports. But we've added those dates. There's no other changes to those reports, and those dates are to complete the work this year. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Well, you teed up financial reports and motions very nicely. So I'm going to take a consent of 5.1 through 5.16. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Penny. A second. Thanks, John. Any questions or comments? Okay, on favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? 5.17 is a motion to accept a donation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. A second. Thank you, Leah. So we have 3 donations tonight. One is for the board to accept the donation of 131 elementary classroom books to support the district's cultural competence strategic goal, and that gratitude be bestowed upon the donors of the Pelham Equity Book Drive who seek to diversify classroom libraries with their donations, and to accept future donations during the 2020-2021 school year. The next one is for $10,816 to support the Academy Plus program at Pelham Memorial High School for the program from Pelham Civics for the 2020-2021 school year. And thirdly, sorry, there's 4 donations tonight, very generous. The third one is to accept the monetary donation of $1,000 to support the Pelham Equity Book Drive, and that gratitude be bestowed, I'm tongue-tied, sorry, be bestowed upon its donor, the Pelham Civic Association. 2 great donations from the Civics. And fourth is a donation of a baritone horn for use in the Pelham Elementary Schools, and that gratitude be bestowed upon its donor who wishes to remain anonymous. Very, very generous. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, this brings us to section 6, which is policy monitoring and governance. We have 3 new policies tonight. I'm going to turn this over to Eileen. 6.1 is policy 5670, records management. It's first reading.
Yeah, so, oh, hold on. Am I, oh, I'm not muted. Excellent. Okay, records management is one that we, it's new this year, and it's pretty brief, and it is, it's a set of guidelines that we already adhere to. They're just part of what we've always had to do, according to Jim. Right, Jim? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. So it's nothing terribly complicated, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
And Eileen, if I remember correctly, the guidelines the state guidelines that we follow are being updated. So we're updating this just in correspondence with that update.
Yes, sorry, that was a much better way to say we already do it. Yeah.
It's something we do that we're creating a policy for.
Yes, an easy one.
Like that. Okay, so the next one is policy 5676. Wait, first of all, does anybody have any questions or comments? Okay, policy 5676, privacy and security for student data and teacher and principal data. This is also the first reading.
Right. So we've been talking about this policy for quite some time, so long that we are now late to getting it done. It's a required policy, and we need to adopt it in some form soon. It's basically an update, not an update, but it's a policy that deals with the current world of privacy or data privacy, especially online data privacy. It identifies a lot of definitions, as well as talks about how what the rules are around contractors and subcontractors and third-party contractors, and how the data has to be handled. And at the end, it also addresses how people might communicate if there's been a breach or if they suspect a breach, and also talks about specifically how basically nothing can be done with student privacy that is commercial. So we can't sell it. Nobody can use it for advertising, all of those privacy issues. So also this one, I think, is, I believe it's the first of its kind. We haven't had this policy before. And I think it is very, very valuable to the students and the district.
Dr. Champ, was this what came up also in the context of, maybe I'm confused, the PTA council discussions last year around the school pictures and like we had to change the way we did.
Oh, yes.
Contracted with
Yeah, you're
school
right.
pictures,
Yeah,
right?
because it limits, it's one of the policies that limits sharing of particular information. I think you're referring to things that are directory information versus personally identifying information. So yes, this is a policy that would definitely be in that realm.
Okay.
And I meant to also say that most of these are issues that John Scalise had already been dealing with. Some of them he was spurred to address, but in general, we have been following these since John has been looking at them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And John's been really ahead of the curve with the was Ed Law 2D that governs this whole area of technology, student data, et cetera. He's been functioning above the standards while the standards were coming into place. So we're really well positioned there. And within the policy, it does identify I believe it's a data privacy officer. And John, within the policy, is designated in that role.
I just wanted to say, Eileen, that John has also been very helpful in explaining to those of us who are not as familiar with some of the lingo. When we have, as Eileen said, been working on this policy now for many months, and going over it more than one time with John has been really, really helpful. So
yeah, totally. He's been really helpful. So I think this is one that, in the interest of time, that maybe after the next reading, we would waive the third.
Seems to make sense if we're already late on that. Yeah. Does anybody have any more questions or comments on this one tonight? Okay, our third policy is policy 3420, non-discrimination and anti-harassment in the district at the first reading.
So this is an update to policy, and it is more of really an overall statement. It doesn't deal with any particular group or any particular situation. It more defines non-discrimination and anti-harassment, and it really is just our commitment to those things as a district. There are other policies that kind of flow from this that are more specific to students or to staff about different types, like there's a sexual harassment one for both of those groups, but this is much more of an overarching commitment to non-discrimination and anti-harassment.
And we covered the sexual harassment one last year, right? I think Steve helped us work on that.
We did last year. The staff.
It's amazing how these policies feed into one another.
Yeah, and I think there have been changes and updates to sexual harassment law in particular within the last over the summer, some significant changes. So this will help. I believe this will help to keep this policy in alignment with those changes as we work towards, carrying them out through all the other related policies as well.
And many thanks to the committee and, of course, our newest member,
Ms. Pauline Davies. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this one? Okay, some first readings done. Section 7 is superintendent's personnel recommendations. I'm going to take a consent of 7.1 through 7.4. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thanks. Thanks, Eileen. Any questions or comments or anything to add, Steve or Jim? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Section 8 is people personnel services. Do I have a motion to consent 8.1 and 8.2?
So moved.
Thank
Second.
you. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Section 9 is new business. Do we have any new business? Okay. Section 10 is comments and communications from the public. I'm back and make sure I don't see emails before for public comment. We do not. So,
Madam President, would you entertain a motion to adjourn? Sorry.
I was going to say Pauline doesn't know we have a designated person who always makes the first motion for section.
So, Madam President, would you entertain a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, Venny. Any questions or comments? Favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you.
Happy
Happy holidays.
Holidays.
Thank you.
Bye.